here. Do a record here. Record.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Yeah, so it's like this. We want to do some Kavanos for Rosh Hashana. Now there's a lot of them. Let me try to have a structure, and we'll choose where to go with it. Like, choose your adventure. Basically, just for the basic structure. In Shar Kavanos, I actually have somewhere written down the structure of it, if I could find it. I'll look for it meanwhile. But we have, basically, just to understand the story, we have something like this. Yeah, it's here. We have really, it's divided into three. I'll divide it into 4 parts. There's the first, what's called the Drush Aleph. It doesn't actually, it's called Akdama. If you look here, you see it says Akdama. Doesn't even have a number. I call it 0 because, like in computer science, instead of starting from 1, we start from 0. So this is the number 0, and this is the number 1. Anyways, that's a Kabbalah because, anyways, which is some, like, as Reb Chaim Vital usually does, at least Reb Shmuel Vital, who organized this book, he gives you, before he gets into the actual meat of the stuff, he gives you a bunch of different minhagim or random quotes that are sort of relevant but somewhat less relevant, and then he gets into the actual learning. So that's the first part. I'll call it part 1. Does that make sense? You hear me?
From where? Yeah, quotes from where?
Mostly from Darizal himself. So because of the way it was written down, that is, two things I will see right here. There's hanhagas, so manhagim, or things that Darizal used to do or taught to do, which are not like ideas, not kavanas, not thoughts or explanations. They're just manhagim. Sometimes they come with some little explanation, but they're not mainly about explanation. So that's number 1. And number 2, I call it ikutim, like. Sometimes there's over here you have some, for example, over here you have some parts which Darizal himself wrote. Generally, Ketvari are class notes which Reb Chaim Vital wrote down, and then I'm hearing an echo again. Did you do something?
Let me turn off my thing.
No, don't turn off the video. Turn off them. Reb Chaim Vital. I'm sorry. These were basically lecture notes where he wrote down the classes and then made it into a book. And then there's some very few parts. Actually, in Kavanos Amiadim, there's 1 or 2 parts which Darizal himself wrote down. And we have them here, some of them. So the parts that have to do with Rosh Hashana. And things like that. So that's number 1. It's sort of miscellaneous. You know what it is? It's like the extended cut, like the things that were cut out of the film he puts here. Okay. Then there's really 3 subjects which we have to talk about in Rosh Hashana. Maybe also Al Pi Halacha it's like this, but in his organization it's definitely like this. If you look in Pri Etz Chaim, you'll see explicitly this tripart difference, tripart separation parts. There's the concept of Rosh Hashana itself, which, in other words, we'll see how he conceptualized it, but it being the first day of the year, or what does it mean? There's in some sense, the year starts in Nisan, right? In some sense, it starts in Tishri. What is the story of Rosh Hashana, right? And generally, in every holiday, we have these 3 parts, really, right? We could come Pesach, we could say, well, there's a story of Pesach. There's the concept of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and then if you're a Rizal, you're going to say, what is Mitzrayim? What is Yetzias Mitzrayim? And so on. The same thing for Rosh Hashana. We have to understand all of the concepts, right? So, what does it mean to be the beginning of the year? How many ways are there to be the beginning of the year? What does it mean to have, there's a din, right? There's a whole story with the din. There's Amtokas din. What else is Rosh Hashana about, basically, right? It's a third important thing to him, which based on the Midrash and stuff. The story of Rosh Hashana is really the story of creation, right? Because if all Yom Tovim have sort of a historical background, like Pesach is about Yetzias Mitzrayim, Purim is about the story of Purim, and so on. And Rosh Hashana isn't really connected explicitly in the Torah, at least, to any historical story. To the Arizal, again based on Chazal, it's connected to the story of Brias HaOlam, because we say Zah Yom Tchilas Ma'asecha, which means that according to one Shita, at least, Adam Rishon was created on Rosh Hashana. So if you want to know what the historical story is sort of sort of transcend history in some sense, right? Because it's kind of the start of history, or at least maybe even before human history in some sense, or maybe the first act of human history, which is creation of Adam Rishon. So that's the history of Rosh Hashanah. So anyways, all of these things need to be explained, and for that reason, they need to be explained in his system, what they mean for a person who assumes the Arizal's assumptions. So that's the second part, the very important part, and probably if we would be focused more on the theory, we would be focused mostly on this part. And it probably takes him a long time, like 2 or 3. I wrote down here. Over here, if you look in Drush, let's go back to the Drush Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. I think are basically about this. Let me see what I wrote. Yeah, and maybe if you see here, when they numbered the different parts, there says Drush Aleph, Drush Beis, right? So Drush Aleph says Koilel Bein Rosh Hashanah, meaning general concept of Rosh Hashanah. Then Wikitext makes it easier to jump, right? Drush Beis is about why there's 2 days Rosh Hashanah, so again a general thing. Drush Gimel is the concept of the Nasira. Drush Dal is also about Bein Rosh Hashanah, so it sort of repeats the first 3. So the first 4 chapters, so to speak, he called them Drushim, just numbered chapters or parts, are about the general concept of Rosh Hashanah. So that's one kind of limit, one kind of thing to learn. Like, again, what does it mean? Why is it on this day? Why is there 2 days? All kind of questions like that. Then there's another important thing, and maybe for some people, maybe would say it's the most important thing, which is the mitzvah of Tekiyas Shofar, right? So we have the mitzvah of Tekiyas Shofar, and the mitzvah of Tekiyas Shofar was seen very anciently. The Zohar talks about it at length, and other earlier Mefarshim. Very important to know the Kavanos of Tekiyas Shofar. Tekiyas Shofar has a meaning, interesting, in some sense more than other mitzvahs. We'll get to all these things maybe at more at length. So basically, the second thing, that's the main mitzvah, right? If you ask a halacha person like the Rambam, what's Rosh Hashanah? He's going to say, well, yeah, but tshuva is, the Rambam made tshuva is one meaning of shofar, but Rosh Hashanah doesn't say tshuva. I mean, it's not like. I'm
saying shofar is the meaning.
Yeah. The meaning of yes, for sure. But that was right. So the meaning of shofar is very central because we talk about it as tshuva. The Rizal has probably his own way of understanding that. But yes, so the meaning of Tekiyas Shofar, which is the mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah, like we talk often. At least one of the ways of organizing things is in say which mitzvah is it, right? Pesach has the mitzvah of eating matzah, Sapir Mitzrayim, things like that, right, and so on. So Rosh Hashanah, the mitzvah is Tekiyas Shofar. It's called Yom Teruah, right? The midday of Tekiyas Shofar. So that's the second thing that needs a lot of explanation. And the third thing, I skipped the number 0. So the fourth thing, or the third thing, is the tefillas. So and again, this is true for every Yom Tov. Has certain different haisufas in tefillah, different nusach tefillah. For Rosh Hashanah, this is actually somewhat special because we spend a lot of time doing davening on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So there's a lot to speak about, and the Rizal has a lot to say about the Kavanos of that and the meaning of that and how to actually do that. So at Kan now does my structure make sense? Yeah, I didn't make up this structure. It's explicit in Pretz Chaim, as I said. And interestingly, in each of these parts are very important, so we can't really skip any. I'm just going to try to go in order, just because I'll know where I'm up to, and wherever we get to. But these are the 4 parts of that we should think about. Is there one that you think is more important that we should?
Sounded like number 2.
Number 2, meaning the actual concept of Rosh Hashanah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If you're a sechel person, then that's the most important. But if you're a mitzvah person, then the fourth one is more important. If you're a like tefillah person, so I want because I'm a yeah.
You haven't said anything about. I mean, what?
I'm just.
To the others or not?
What? I didn't do. Of course, there's teichen to all of them. There's.
According to Chris, I don't know why. So is there a seder here, or is there?
I don't think. I mean, generally, the only seder, and here the order is sort of general, then tefillas, and then shofar. I think at Pri Chaim it's the opposite. I'm not sure where we could look. Pri Chaim, there's also in Wikitext somewhere.
Okay, let's just take thing one at a
We'll
time.
start in since I'm a teacher, I have to know where I'm up to. I'm just gonna start in the beginning, which is at number 0, and also gives me an easy way in to like I don't know. It's not showing me whatever. It's not showing me the order, and Seferia will probably find the order because they have Pri Chaim. Yeah, what I'm gonna do is start in the first one, which has sort of a little of each, and see if we can understand. Some of the parts are harder to understand because they lack a lot of context, but it's worthwhile to just do that. It's also easy, so I'm gonna do that. I just wanted to show you. Let me see if I could find the Pri Chaim structure.
So to begin with, what does it mean a kavana?
Wait. We start in the middle. I'm gonna get to that. Yeah. So the Shara Hashana, Shat Tfilas Hashana are the same order. You see. Shara Hashana, Shat Tfilas Hashana, and Shara Shofar. The same order as Net Shara Kavanos, basically. We're not doing Kavanos so quickly. Actually, we will. Let's read a little and let them speak to us, and then Does that make sense? Because I like it's traditional and it makes me know where I am. Okay. Where are we? The first. Okay. Wow. So how are we gonna do this? Let's try. The first thing, if you see where I'm here, the first thing Reb Chaim Vital has to tell us is that there is to say slichas entire Chodesh Elul. Inyan slichas Shabbat Esfat. So this Reb Yid, I don't know what it means. Yochanan Yaakov, or I think Sagis told him that he saw him saying it mila b'mila in Matzibah. I could give you a whole class on this line if you really want. Because you want to know what Kavanos are. But the Arizal also was a good Jew. And he would go to shul. He wasn't officially a Sephardi, or he was a Sephardi when he wanted to. But, I mean, he was, I don't remember his genealogy, I don't remember, there's some debate about it, but he wasn't Sephardi. And from a genetic perspective, he was not Sephardi. He was literally called Ashkenazi. I mean, you can't get much better than that. That was his last name or something like that. But I think he had, I don't remember the biographical details. You'll have to find somewhere else. I don't remember them. But he would do Sephardi. He would generally daven in the Sephardi shul, besides for when it suited him. I'm not sure exactly why. Or he basically was, one of the interesting things with Arizal, and in this sense, is that he's living in a very urban environment, at least when he's in Tzfas. In the sense of it's also very urban and very, what I'm going to say, probably more cosmopolitan, right? So we have this imagination of like, if you live in New York City or in LA or wherever, I don't know about LA actually, then you sort of, or in Yerushalayim, and in most major Jewish places nowadays, you don't live in a community, right? If you have a community, it's a virtual community in the sense of I'm a Belzer, I'm a Satmara, or something like that. But if anyone walks into the town, there's like 500 different shuls, and you could basically pick whatever you want, right? Like yesterday, I asked someone a question, a halacha question, I need to make a bris. And I asked the moil, he said, I don't know, ask a rabbi. And I'm like, okay, what is, you know the answer, tell me what the rabbi would say. It's like, it depends which rabbi you'll ask. So basically, you can get whatever answer you want because you just choose. And the decision which rabbi to ask is your own decision, right? So my point is, it's people seem to assume sometimes that this is a very, very recent thing. So you turn out, like people talk about this, you turn out somewhat atomized individuals, right? Where even if you do belong to something, it's sort of voluntary and not a given to you, right? And in other words, if you like Sephardi songs, you can go to a Sephardi shul. Lakewood, there's not really any Sephardi, there's very few Sephardi shuls, but for some reason. But you can go to a Chassidish shul, or a Litvish shul, or whatever you want. And people think that you're missing something by doing that, which might be true. In other words, you lose a certain authenticity, or you lose a certain. There's always the paradox of choice. Choice is hard for people. People don't like choosing.
People have a minhag over saying, I don't understand. people have a minhag avosenu.
Yeah, but that's fake. You see, because
What?
because minhag avosenu literally means minhag originally means literally in the Mishnah. It basically means minhag is literally what you do. It's very weird. It's very conceptually confusing also to people, and very actually confusing when minhag becomes another halacha. Understand? So, for example, we bump into this very often, and my point was going to be that this is not actually so new. It's actually happening for hundreds of years, at least, and maybe more. But when you say I have a minhag, that's already virtual in the sense of you do not have a grounded minhag, because once you have to say I have a minhag, you don't have a minhag. Minhag is a thing that you don't have to say. So in the Mishnah's times, right? The Mishnah talks about some towns having a minhag to whatever, do melacha on Erev Pesach, and some towns have minhag not to do melacha on Erev Pesach, right? So that's the primary example. And you can be a traveler, you can be a guest, like if you were in one place and you end up in another place for Pesach, and the halacha is that you have to do what that town is doing, because mipnei machlokas, that's the language of the Mishnah, because people will get mad at you for not following their minhag, right? Now, if one of those people, now we get in later generations, we get into these weird kind of questions. What if the whole town picks itself up and moves somewhere else, right? There's some sort of Holocaust or some sort of expulsion, and they end up somewhere else. Like, where does the minhag come along with them? So once you're doing that, you're having a virtual minhag, not a real minhag. Understand? Because it's not something that you do because that's what the people in this town do. Like, for example, if you live in a town and there's only one shul, and in that shul they daven a certain nusach, the question of changing it is really a question of, it's a political question, right? Automatically, because you're gonna have to make your own shul, or you're gonna have to convince that shul to change their nusach. Once there's already every shul within 4-block radius, then you're not having a political question. It's only a question of, do you, as a personal person with individual like choice, and like at this big smorgasbord of different kinds of Judaisms, which one do you like? And maybe we could say, maybe you have an obligation to follow the one that your father did. I don't know that you have such an obligation, halachically, at least originally. At least it's very different. It's a very different sense of minhag than the real sense of it.
So you're making a point about contemporary Judaism.
Yes.
And I don't really see it's not so important.
No, I didn't say it's important.
What's it called? You're also kind of conflating or confusing location with polity, right?
1 second. No, originally meaning, in the way it's structured in the halacha originally, there's only location. There's nothing else. I mean, of course, the location has a certain what you call polity, but it's not. You can move from one location to another. You cannot choose which court to subject yourself to, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's your mistake. Is like it's. I don't think it's. It was ever that black and white. Like
I'm getting to that. I'm just telling you, giving you a sort of how I mean. It's at least the concept of minhag hamakom is definitely constructed this way.
Okay.
Yeah, it's literally called that, minhag hamakom. There is no such a thing in halacha as minhag avosenu. You have to understand that. There's not really such a thing. That might be a nice idea. It might exist once minhag hamakom stopped existing. But in halachically, when we talk about minhag, it's always minhag hamakom. And of course, I what I wanted to get is really where you want to get to, which is definitely more complicated than that. But at least halachically, there's basically only minhag hamakom. And of course, it gets more complicated because that mokem wakes up, like I'm saying. But in general, that's how it's at least constructed the halacha, and therefore it's actually pretty explicit in the poskim that talk about this. That theoretically, if we go to an island like a no man's land, halachically speaking, right, and we either we don't have a community or we create our own community. We have no obligation to any minhag. We can do whatever we want. This is it's like for real. Like for example, I'll give you a real example, which is to show you that serious. The halacha of Yom Tov Shani, right? The fact that we do 2 days Yom Tov in Chutzlaretz is only a minhag. Literally, there it says minhag avesayne, right? But that's the language. But actually, if you look at the halacha, you'll see that it's really minhag hamoke, because sorry, I just have to answer my wife. Because again, the halacha. So I'll tell you why. So actually, there's both there. I'm just gonna tell you where I see my tzad. We're totally distracted here, but anyways,
I know.
I'll get back to it in just a minute, but I can't. So if a person from Eretz Yisrael comes to America, the halacha is he has to keep 2 days, at least publicly, right? What he does personally is another question, but he definitely needs to keep 2 days of Yom Tov, and the reason being because of minhag hamakayim. Because over here we have 2 days, and I know that you might not have, or you might not even have. Doesn't matter. This is over here, and basically people will get mad at you, right? If you come with your car to shul on second day Yom Tov, like they're going, seriously, that's not what we do. But if you're outside of town, right? If you're in there's like a Tchum Shabbos, some kind of shir like that, then you could do melacha. So if you go to the airport or whatever, something like that, you're allowed to, because it's not a Jewish yeshuv. How do you call it? Not a Jewish settlement. So kind of it's a no man's land, halachically, minhagically speaking. So therefore, you could do whatever you want. You could stay with your own minhag. I'm just showing you that even though the fact now, it's true that the entire chutzlaretz might need to continue doing their minhag because their fathers have done it. But it's different than saying that what obligates a person that comes there that doesn't have that minhag is not as... Okay, maybe I'm confusing things. Okay, let's go back to where I am. Oh, what I was saying is that... what? No, I want... The interesting point that I'm going to make here is that in the... We could argue about this somewhat halachically. There might be some sense of... again... okay. I don't know, a Jew. Like, 1 second.
No. He was mentioned together with the mitzvah and the Ran.
No, that's someone else. This was a person that knew the Arizal. It can't be. Harisagis is... I don't know. We could ask Google as everything else. He must have been one of the... he was one of the Arizal students. I don't know who he was. I didn't... Reb Shlomo Sagis? No, I think his name was Reb Yaakov. Sagis is last name. Yonasan Sagis, it says here, actually.
Yonasan Sagis?
I guess you say Sa. Maybe it's Shah. What do I know? Yonasan Sagis, I think. It doesn't... I don't see information. We could look in Avivi's book. He might have information about him.
Oh, yeah, I found here.
Yeah, he's quoted other types from Minhagim and stuff like that. What did I want to say? Oh, what I wanted to say is that this kind of pick and choose might have some problems, but at least in matters of like ritual and liturgy and stuff like that, the Arizal 100% felt himself was okay with picking and choosing. He was not worried for minhag avoisa very much. That's why in later generations that we have the big controversy about Nusach HaTfilah with the Chassidim and the Misnagdim, and the Chassidim saying they're basing themselves on the Arizal. But it seems to be very clear that the Arizal himself didn't really... He understood that each shul is going to continue doing their minhag, but he didn't think that he personally was obligated to do any specific minhag. He would pick and choose what made sense to him. That's one part of it, one side to it, and there's some value in that. In other words, of course, being very broad in this way means that you could learn from everyone, right? You can say, well, this is not my minhag. Well, it might be a good thing anyways, or there might be something value to learn. That is generally a very, although the B'chaim Tal has different attitudes sometimes, but the Rizal generally is actually an extremely smorgasbord style person. He likes to learn. He's lemed mekalodam. He likes to learn from everyone, and he takes pieces from all kind of places for his ideas, and for his minhagim. So apparently, the Rizal would say the Sfari Slichas with them, mila b'mila. And okay, so that's one thing. That's one point that I had to say about this line. Another point is that that Rizal was a very great person, and at least the way he's presented and to us by the Chaim Vital and others, he would do things with great intention, with a real mastery over his mind, and know what he's doing. But he was not let's say it like this, might have been intellectually a revolutionary in some ways, although that's how he's understood by many of his readers. But he was not some kind of like I just said, he might have picked and choose in some ways, but he had a lot of respect for tzibur, like he says over here, mila b'mila imat tzibur. He had a lot of respect for the idea that if you walk into a shul, you need to be sort of silent and follow along what the Shlech Tzibur is doing, follow along with the people. He would not go in someone's shul and just do his own thing. Like many later Hasidim have this kind of attitude where they're not really part of anything. Even when they do have like a Hasidic shul, it's each person in his corner just doing his own thing. And that is for all of...
That's an interesting, like the flip side.
That's the flip side of that is somewhat.
Very interesting.
Yeah, he seems to... At least the picture you get from this line is like he's walking in and is like, for whichever reason he chose to do it to a whole month, and then he sits down and they're chanting whatever they're doing, and he chants along, and he says a lot of. I think it's a good practice, at least for people like me that don't really like that. It's at least a good idea. Like sometimes maybe that's what I was gonna say. Like al pi chassidus, that's the first thing Rosh Hashanah to be able to do something mila b'mila imat tzibur is a very big. It's a very useful thing because it gets you into the mood. It can get you into real hasagas also, but it's a useful thing, and especially for Rosh Hashanah, there's a whole drush in the Zohar about b'sleich ami anochi yeshaves. I don't know if the Arizal quotes it ever, but it's brought down in many places. In the Zohar and Parshas, I don't remember. The Zohar talks about it's a medrash on the Isha Shinamis, that the story was that, what was the story? She did a favor for Elisha, right? She let him sleep in her house. And Elisha was telling her, what can I do for you, right? He said, and the language he says, do you want me to speak to you for you to the king or to the general, something like that. And it's sort of a weird thing, because he's like, I have all these connections, I'm a Navi, and I talk with the king, I talk with the generals, and if you need me to take care of something for you, I'll take care of it. And her response is sort of, what? I'm just a simple woman, I have nothing to do with the king, and I'm not, it's not like, what are you going to do, some diplomacy for me that they don't invade some country? I'm nothing to do with that. So it says like, I sit within my people. So in other words, what she's basically saying, Al Pi Pshat, is that she's just a simple woman, she has nothing, but she says, I don't have a child, so please daven that I have a child. And then she has the child, and then there's the whole story of the child dying, and so on. Okay, and very nice story, Al Pi Pshat also. But the Zohar says that the nimshal, or the one of the inner meaning of this story, is that he's saying that this is, I'll say the Zohar says that it was Rosh Hashanah. That's why he's asking her these questions. And what he's saying is that he's a tzaddik, and if you're a real tzaddik, then Rosh Hashanah you sort of deal with the universe. You take care of, he's going to speak El HaMelech, means to God. V'sarat tzvava is like it says, V'yigba Hashem tzokes b'mishpat. So there's some concept of tzva, Yisar tzva, that has to do with Rosh Hashanah. And he's saying, how should I involve you, or what should I do for you in this day of Rosh Hashanah? And then the Zohar says that what she answers is, please don't. So don't single me out on Rosh Hashanah, because it's not a good thing that there's this different stories of the conception of the din and Bezen Shalmal and Rosh Hashanah, that if you get singled out, then you're in trouble. Because like the Sutton said, Hasamti lip, God said to the Sutton in Sefer Eiv, Hasamta lipchal avde Eiv. Did you notice this Eiv guy? And once he was noticed, then he wasn't for real trouble. Because if you look at someone very closely, like in in the way of din, right? Now, there's good ways, then there's always something to find. You're always going to be in trouble. So the Zohar says the best solution for this problem is to say, no, I'm just a Jew. I'm just part of all the other Jews. I come to Shul Rosh Hashanah, I blow shofar and whatever, and don't attract attention to yourself, at least in times of din. In times of Rosh Hashanah, it's not a good place to attract attention for yourself. The Sgula is, the way of living is to be Imat Tzibur. So Imat Tzibur, then you have the Schos Rabim, you have the Knesset Yisrael, which is always good. You don't get into trouble. So it seems to be important for Rosh Hashanah. We have to think about this image very much, and I don't have right now anything major to say about it. It's a very important question, right? Because just to make it a little clearer, it would seem like the most, and since I'm on this topic, that the most individualistic avoid, or out of all the Yom Tovim, for example, the most hyper-focused on the individual is Rosh Hashanah. And it's literally in the Mishnah, right? Pesach is a national story. It's Yitzias Mitzrayim, and Matan Torah, Shavuos, and so on. The one where the story, and again, it goes back to our question, what's the story of Rosh Hashanah, right? Which one is the story of Rosh Hashanah? At least one of the stories of Rosh Hashanah, if you ask in kindergarten kid, will tell you the story is that God has these scales, and he weighs your mitzvahs, and he checks if you're a tzaddik, and he gives you prizes if you're a tzaddik, and punishments if you're a rasha, and so on, right? That's all about the individual person. And it says in the Mishnah, Kol boy oilam oifnu lefanav, each one, right? Each one gets judged. So it would seem to be the day, or the time, or the moment for a person as he is distinct from family, from belonging, from nation, from all kind of different generalizations. And it seems that the Zohar is actually against this, or at least sees this itself maybe in some way as part of the problem. So he says you should not think of yourself as a person. You should think of yourself as part of the group, or part of the what we say Klal Yisrael, B'seich Ami, and it might be itself a good thing. So that's that is that's another thing to think about this part. Okay, that's the first minhag. You want, if we do it now, I'll tell you what is going on, but we're gonna have to skip it somewhat because it's gonna confuse us very much. We'll read a little bit because you wanted to know what is Kavanos, and other things like that. So the next
point of the whole sefer. What's the whole purpose?
The point of It's what it says here. I'll show you. Where is it? Oh. So the next thing is that there's this so this shtickle, this whole piece is that Arizal himself. It doesn't say here, but I know that it says in other places. I don't know. It's clear. I don't know why they're missing the note that says that, or maybe they put it under or wherever. This is the Arizal himself writing, so some sort of notes that he wrote to himself, and it's basically says like this. There's two versions of the same thing. Once they both sort of don't end, so he didn't seem to finish them, or we don't have the end of it, whatever the story is. And it says like this. I'll read you from the second one because that's where it sort of gives me a place to get into the point of everything that we need to know. And it says like this. It says in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So this is Arizal writing. Nasati alibi lachkol veloser. I've taken to heart to research and to search. Listed is literally to search, right? Like meraglem, leisesuru, yesuru esoretz, right? To be curious and to search. So the result is you're getting a lot of he's gonna get to it, but yes, these particular questions are very nitty gritty. He wants to know why exactly the language is like this and how it works, and he doesn't really say what the teretz is over here. So but he says what he's actually interested in this language at least, and the Arizal actually has this thing a lot more than Reb Chaim Vital, which writes most of it, where he gives you some sort of insight into his actual mind working when he's thinking of things. So he doesn't just give you the conclusion of his thought, he actually gives you the way he's thinking. And he's like saying, well, I've had this question, I've been wondering about this, and I've been, gosh, yeah, I've been, you're skipping. I want to read this line. I'm gonna skip what you're saying. He wants to know the be'inyan tfilas Hashana, and he says the reason for it. I think that's a very important line because it's one of the only explicit parts in Shara Kavanos that says something like this. And it says why he wants to know this question. So he's not interested academically, and it might just be a way for him to talking about the schira, why it says like this, why it says like that. Different Tosafos and Tefillah that there is, but he seems to. So that's the material. That's like how he's gonna do it. So how is he going to find out? He's going to look into all these little differences and try to understand what they mean and so on. But he says why he did that is Lavid es bari avodah shebelev ze tefillah b'yomim neiroim ele asher hamelech ha'elyon yoshev al kisei din. Okay, so I guess the first part of this sentence is the interesting one, where he says there's something called avodah shebelev ze tefillah, right? And he wants to know how to do it correctly. Right, now what is avodah? This I focus my language. What? This. It's the second one. The second one is just a repeat of the same thing. Okay. He is where am I? Here, he starts with the same, he just adds this language, that's why I'm interested in this one. What is avodah shebelev ze tefillah? This is really it's from the Gemara that talks about lavdi b'chol levavchem ez avodah shebelev havayim ze tefillah. Right, so it's actually very, very interesting. What is the simple thing that it says in the Gemara? Something like this. Literally, if you read what it says, you're supposed to worship God with your entire heart, right? So it simply means something like, do not do it with half your heart, right? Basically. So what does it mean to do things with half a heart? It basically means to be a hypocrite, right? It means to come to Avodas Hashem one day, and then in your backyard you have some Avodah Zarah or something like that. So that would be not b'chol levavchem. And if you read, this is language that goes through in Tanakh many times. Avodah b'chol halev, b'chol libo. It basically means fully, really, or sincerely, or authentically, but in the very basic sense of not doing it fakely, which means if a faker, in other words, someone that's like the Navi says, you can do something beloy lev, right? Beloy lev, or bepev beloy belev. Echad called it echad bepev, echad belev, right? Or I'm trying to remember this language chatzi lev, but that's how I'm conceptualizing it. Or you could say something like Besfiv, yeah, that's the pasuk that we all quote. Besfiv v'sfasav kibduni v'libo yirochak mimeni. So you could be over Hashem bepeh, not belev. Right, but al pi pshat, in the first level of that, it just means the things that you do. So what is love lahavidus Hashem? It means do mitzvahs. It means come to his Beis Hamikdash, come to his shul, do his things that he tells you, and don't do it unsincerely. Right, unsincerely meaning don't at night go to Avodah Zarah and by day to shul and pretend nobody noticed. Things like that. Now, Chazal wanted to read it a little sharper than this, because that's simple pshat. Because they said there's something called Avodah Shebelev, in other words, Avodah which is only Belev. So until now we have Avodah Shebe Avodim, Shebe Yadayim, Shebe whatever it is, and it needs to be Belev, right? Like it's really al pi pshat in most mitzvahs, at least the way most people understand them. You need to do the mitzvah, and then you want to do it fully, in the sense of being entirely there, in the sense of meaning it seriously, in the sense of not being a faker, things like that. But this Chazal, where they say that tefillah is avodah shebelev, so why is tefillah avodah shebelev? And all avodas should be belev. All avodas are also belev, or need to be with your heart. Otherwise, you're really faking it. I mean, you're not. It's not even avodah b'chlal. So what they really mean to say is eze avodah shehi belev bilvad. And this is really a sort of revolution in the meaning of avodah shebelev. So it doesn't mean do something and mean it. It means that there is some kind of avodas Hashem which entirely transpires within a person's heart. The lev just doesn't necessarily mean in your heart. That's just the language, but like literally means within your mind, or however you want to call the thing that's within. Now, therefore, there is avodah which is not something to be done. And this is very important because generally even tefillah doesn't get conceptualized like this, right? Even tefillah gets conceptualized as something that you do, at least with your mouth. And then you say, okay, it's good to do it with your mouth. Once you're doing it, you should mean it, right? Mean what you say. Generally, we talk about kavanah in the sense of mean what you say, right? There's kavanos that most people, if you ask any normal person, right? If there's not shara kavanos, if there's just kavanah but tefillah, right? In the Shulchan Aruch, maybe. You say you should have kavanah but tefillah. It means if you say Burichatu Hashem, you should mean what you say. We could have a lot of different meanings or levels of this meaning what you say, right? Don't be thinking about the latest memes or whatever news. Don't be entirely out of it. Don't be insincere, right? Don't say Hashiveni v'in when you're planning to do the opposite and so on. But all of these things are mean what you say, right? All of this is not avodah shebelev. It's avodah shebepeh, which is belev, which is also belev, or at least is not having a lev soif. It's not echad bepeh ve'echad belev. It's what we call piv v'libay shovin, right? It's equally in the heart and in the. You're not lying or not being hypocritical. But avodah shebelev really means something different. It really means that can be an entire avodah, which totally happens belev, and the fact that there's some, it's not even clear. Of course, Api Halacha might be clear like that. But it's not entirely clear that tefillah needs to have words at all, at least for the actual concept of it. If you ask halacha, it might have its own ways of thinking, but it doesn't need words at all. It can happen entirely belev, and there's definitely things that you're yotze belev. You can read different sugis and mesechtas berachos that talk about it. And belev means whatever it means. It means not something that you do. It's something in your inside, either that you think or that you mean, things like that. So,
but the role of speech in Jewish practice is fundamental.
No.
And even thinking is already reliant heavily on speech.
No.
So
where do you get that idea from?
What else is there? I mean,
there's avodah shebelev. I don't know what Buddhists have. Avodah shebelev is not words.
Yes, it is. I mean, there's nothing else. There's like
what do you mean?
Of like a heart, mind. They call it some kind of it's an impossible place of the super conscious.
Why are we getting to this stuff? I'm not sure what's super conscious got to do with anything. I'm not worried if there's language or not. I don't know why we would be worried if you're thinking with language or not. What I'm worried is about something that is in words or in words in the sense of speech, not in the sense of thinking with language. I don't know if everyone speaks with language or not. That's different machlokes. I mean, it's not a machlokes. It's a question about the reality, and it doesn't seem to be so simple like this because you're thinking in concepts now. But basically, what they're saying is that it doesn't start with speech. Of course not. There might be words. I'm not worried about there being words. I'm not worried about that kind of level of things. It might also be things which don't need words, or not entirely clear that maybe images, or maybe there's another discussion. I'm not thinking about this discussion. All I'm saying is that there's something which is weird. What tefillah is supposed to be. Now maybe at some point it became more about words, and then we say, well, when you say those words, say them with a meaning. But that's not what this Chazal seems to be saying, and that's definitely not the way the Arizal and others understood it. They definitely understand it as something that really, the essence of it is entirely internal. In other words, you don't need to internal to the person. That's all. Now you're flying to different levels of things. Internal in the sense of nobody would need to know about it, right? And nobody has different levels also. But again, the basic sense. Try to keep things very simple. In the sense of nobody needs to notice that you're being mispalel, right? This is very different, at least from the literal simple way of thinking where there's always going to be some words happening. And maybe even and it might still be true, but that's not the point of what we're saying. And I think that getting this is very important because otherwise you start asking, otherwise nothing really makes sense at any level in Kavanos, and when you say Shara Kavanos, right? Because it all begins with saying that there is something which now this is just another word for Kavana, right? And just literally means the same thing because the word Kavana we get from this halachic language which talks about Kavana and the Masa or Kavana and Dibra and so on. So if there's a avodah that's belev bilvad, I think that this point itself. See, you start right away jumping extremely how would I say, deeper level stuff, which only get us confused. I'm one of the things I'm noted. Everyone knows this, right? But one of these kind of things are not helpful. I think that kavanas are extremely simple. Everything is extremely simple, and maybe I'm not being fair here. Maybe it's a lot of practice. But what I'm saying is,
I'm hearing an idealization. Idealized nature of prayer is.
No, I'm talking about that. I don't think it's so. No, I'm not talking about beyond speech. I don't know where you got this word beyond speech. I'm not talking about beyond speech. You see, that's what I'm saying. I don't know anything. I'm not saying anything about beyond speech. I'm saying just simply think. That's why, because this is a confusion. This is a very good example of something where you're identifying, but internal just means extremely literally. Just like there's when you could be walking in the street and thinking about whatever you want, nobody would notice. That is all I mean when I say internal. I don't mean anything more than that. I don't mean feelings. I don't mean being in some consciousness, like all the kind of very fancy words and states. I don't mean any of that. All I mean is what kind of, I would say words, right? And because words is easier. What kind of words? I don't mean anything more than that. I don't need it to be more than that. I think it's more than enough to talk about that.
There's different kavanis. The kavanis have different teiches. What other qualities does it have? It's a mental, discursive type of deal.
So I'm at the minimum. I want to be clear with the minimum of things. Mm-hmm. I don't want to, because this is a very good reason, because you start because it gets us into so many different problems and different sort of impassibilities. And the second thing is become impassible, or becomes what Chassidish language likes call like big madregas, or are you there, or is it passable, or do you need 20,000 years of practice to get to it? I don't think we're talking about that. Maybe it's true, but maybe those things are good, but they're not helpful it's not helpful. Let's see what's not helpful. It's not helpful to identify the most basic things with that, although they are identical, and ultimately maybe, but it's not helpful to identify it, because then you're sort of just not there. It's not, I don't find it helpful. What I find helpful is actually to think of things as extremely, extremely, extremely simple. As simple as, that's what I'm getting at. I think that belief in that simple, and taking that simple, clearly simple thing seriously, seems to be the biggest obstacle when I, at least for myself, when we talk about these kind of things. In other words, most people, now let's try to disentangle this for a second, if I'm gonna make sense. To most people, when I tell you, I mean the Rambam talks about this very explicitly in several times. To most people, if I tell you that let's try to think. There is a real avodas Hashem, which consists entirely of thinking thoughts. And thinking thoughts, again, in the most minimal definition of that, not having big, huge concepts in your mind. Just, you know what thinking thoughts is. Everyone knows what thinking thoughts is. That's all. Not having concentration, none of these words. The most mundane a mundane meaning of thinking thoughts. You're thinking thoughts, right? You think thoughts most of the day. Most people have an internal dialogue for the most of the day, or at least for a lot of it. Just that's a world in itself, and that just like there's avodas Hashem, b'maaseh, right? There's actions. Actions are everyone understands actions to be mundane, right? I just do things, so I could drink a cup of water, or I could put on tefillin. They're both everyone, right? Just, am I being clear enough? When I say just put on your tefillin on your head and your hands, now, of course, if you have certain associations, you can say, well, that you mean to say I should be meshabed samech v'salev. Do you mean to say I should, wait, you ran away. Do you mean to say some whole shtickle Torah? Do you mean to say, again, I did it wrong. So it's just like if I say you should put on tefillin. No, it's true that it might be a very good explanation. There might be a good meaning to that, which will mean an entire world of some really deep things and all kinds of pshatim on tefillin that you could find in the entire world. But that's not what I mean. Everyone understands what I mean is the mundane meaning of that. Take your hand and take the thing out of the bag and put it on your hand. And in the same exact way, when I say think Kavanos, what I mean is the most mundane meaning of that. I mean nothing more and nothing less. And just mean take the thought and think it. And if it's an image, we could talk about and differentiate a lot of different ways, just like you can differentiate actions in thousands of levels of preciseness and so on. But that's very interesting. But again, I'm very tempted to say all these fancy things, because just like I would be very tempted to say, what do you mean putting on tefillin is just putting on tefillin? It means an entire meaning, and that's very tempting. But when you do it too many times, you lose the very basic meaning of thing. And this has happened with what's called avodah shebelev. I think it's happened on so many levels and so harshly and so deeply that we're so messed up. And I'm here to return the very basic meaning of it. And the basic meaning of when you say internal worship and avodah shebelev, all I mean is the exact mundane meaning of thinking, which is not outer. Nobody can see it. Literally, nobody can see it. It doesn't need to make you a certain, posture in your body. It doesn't need to create a certain feeling on your nose. Nobody would notice it. It's just in your mind. It's internal. That is exactly what we mean when I say that, just like every other aspect of the world, just like in words, and just like in the world of action, there are actions which can be considered avodas Hashem in different ways. In the same exact way, in the realm of thoughts in the inner world, which is basically consists of thoughts, and at least that's the most basic way of speaking about it. There is avodas Hashem, and there's good thoughts and bad thoughts, and so on. And when we say tefillah, when we say avodah shebelev tefillah, what we mean is that these words should be said not with your mouth, they should be said with your mind. That's all. And saying with your mind in the most simple sense. Thinking it. And it's really, really, really important to me to read it as thinking. And we could differentiate this again. I'm very tempted to do this, and I've done it at other times, to explain what it would do to you and how it would transform you and what it would actually mean. And all these things are extremely tempting and but then you lose the basic access to it, which is extremely simple, which is just a thought, literally just that thought. And it literally works. Now, a thought takes literally a millisecond to think. So then, well, what are you going to think the next second? Think it again. Or continue along the path of thinking the next kavanah or whatever it is. But people very often have this kind of image of like, what do you mean? Kavanah has to mean, being in some state of consciousness. And they generally have a very outer image of it, just to be very clear, right? Generally, if I say kavanah, you would think of someone with some sort of face on his face, some sort of expression on his face. When everyone has different ones according to whichever picture you saw, either it looks very whatever. I'm not good at pretending to have expressions. I'm not gonna do it. But you usually going to imagine it as a certain expression on a certain face or a certain posture in his body. and so on. Now, all of these things might be useful ways to pray, and there's halachas about which posture you should have, maybe even on your face, I don't know. And all these things might be useful. But the moment you say this, then you're like, your imagination, your association with the word kavana, with the word good thoughts, is some person that you once saw in some picture or some image or some imagination of, like, standing with his eyes closed and like entirely in some other place. And that state is a nice thing, and it's very tempting to make it mean that, but it doesn't mean that. Kavanah just means the thought, just like when you, anything, like, there's a halacha that says when you go to the bathroom, you should not think of divrei Torah, right? Head hitter of divrei Torah. And that doesn't, it means literally a thought on that level. Again, we're not talking about don't be in a state of some state of mind or whatever. Just, I'm just using this halacha to show you that, to be able to take seriously your thought. And most people seem to have a problem just with taking that seriously. Because, like, if you're in an entire state and there's a lot of images, a lot of outer images to that, then, okay, they understand that it's serious. But if I tell you, well, it's literally just a thought in your mind, just like there's halacha for these level of thoughts, literally, you're supposed to, and of course the halacha recognizes that it might be hard and you might not have entire control. So of course, once we get into this, we can start talking about how to control it. But again, this is making things way too fancy and too complicated. In the most simple sense, there's a halacha that says that it matters what kind of thoughts you carry in your mind. If you're in an unclean place, right, a place where you don't dignify it with having lofty thoughts, with having thoughts of divrei Torah, at least, whatever the exact halacha means, and so on. If you're in and this is just a very good training, or a very good, it's a very good place to see how it matters what thoughts you literally have in your mind. And same thing, we have hiravayra, right, which just means bad thoughts. There's a lot of different concepts of thoughts being good and bad, which we could show from halacha. And I think that that's literally where Kavanos start, at least. So if I say, and I'm going to get back to this, if I say, be mechaven, I don't know why we have to assume that it means something more than think this. And maybe if the Kavanah is an image, it means visualize this. Or maybe if it's an idea, it means thinking in the way you think ideas. Maybe it's just a word, it's thinking in the way you think words. But everyone knows all these basic things. You really know this. Of course, if you come back and you say, well, I tried, but it took a split second. And what do I do next? Okay, that's a good question. But the split second is great. And this is another thing which we don't take seriously enough, where it seems to be very hard for people to believe. Like you say, okay, for example, I just want to make this clear, because when people ask this question about Kavanos Arizal all the time, and I've thought about this so much, and I have so many different fancy explanations, and this is the real simple explanation, which is also accessible to everyone, and so accessible, and the biggest madrega is really the simplest thing. If I say, people say, well, you could take, of course, it's easy. It seems, people ask, it seems too easy. Like, you could take a Siddur Hashash and just, people flip the pages, what they say. And, okay, let's say you have to read all the words. It doesn't take so much time. So sometimes people ask a question. So what's this Rebbe or someone that was davening for 5 hours? What was he doing? And so on. He said he was doing Kavanos. So it must be that you say that you could do the Kavanah in a split second. You're not doing what he was doing, so you're doing something wrong. And I think that this entire thought process is wrong. Not to say that whatever that people are doing for 5 hours is a bad thing. But the moment you associate the Kavanah with something that takes 20 minutes, firstly, it's definitely not true. If you read Kavanos Sari, you see it does not expect it to take 20 minutes. He actually expects it to be instant. So that's a textual proof. But it's also true in practice. It's also true. And they're really, if I think why people don't, it's just because they don't believe that a split second thought is worth of being called Avodah Shebelev. They think that Avodah Shebelev must mean something, what I would have to say the correct word, more external. Something that I could feel, okay, if I'll take one thought and have concentration, if I could concentrate on it for 10 minutes, then I'll probably get certain feelings and certain associations with that, and maybe that's what Kavanah is. But just take the Shem Havai and think it for a split second. It literally takes a split second. So what's wrong? Why? And like people say, well, that's easy. That can't be what Arizal is meaning. It must be something deeper. And I'm sometimes tempted to say, okay, it's easy, so I guess you do it 30 times a day, right? Because it's so easy. Turns out it's not actually easy. Or at least, maybe the hard part is just taking it seriously. It's easy in the sense that it's simple to do. But most people don't do it. Even the people going around and saying, you people with the Siddur Hashash are just doing you're just doing easy stuff. Like, that's not what it's really about. But he doesn't even do the easy stuff. maybe he's doing something else. Maybe he thinks not speaking about specific people. But if it's easy, then that's great. What's wrong with it being easy? Just think it for a split second. And a split second of thought, and the world of thought is again another thing. When the moment you take seriously thoughts as avodas Hashem by themselves, not as bringing you to certain states, that might be a good thing, but not as that. Not as adding to meaning to the action. Not as any of these things, just as thoughts. Thoughts are themselves. And I'm giving you almost like a Kabbalah's oil kind of way of thinking of thoughts. Just like most Orthodox Jews do mitzvahs just as they are in the most mundane sense, you can do thoughts just as they are in the most mundane sense. Of course, thoughts have nature to actually create transformation, but one of the big blockages for this transformation is taking it too seriously and right away expecting it and so on. And if you could just have the Kabbalah's Olav thought and you say, no, I don't know anything, I'm just going to be mechaven, and if it takes a split second, that's great. And that's the nature of the world of thought, that it takes much quicker than in a certain sense, right? Of course, to think on an entire shtickle Torah will take you long, but to think words takes quicker than to speak them generally, right? So it's obviously the world of thought isn't stuck to time in the same way that the world of words is, or the words of action, right? To build a house takes a few months or whatever it takes, a few years. To talk about it, tell the story takes half an hour, and to think about it takes a split second. And this is not because thinking is worthless. I mean, it's worthless if insofar as you want to affect the real world, you're going to have to do the work. But if you think the opposite, if you think that the real world and world, at least in the inner sense, is the inner world, is the world of thought, then that split second, and you're amazed by this. In a split second, I could think what takes for you 6 hours or 6 years. And that's an amazing property of the world of thought, which philosophers have noticed for a very long time. And it sort of shows the elevation of the world of thought from time and place, which the worlds of action and speech are stuck in, and to a much greater extent. And the same thing is for avodas Hashem. And I think I'm gonna finish here this class because it's important enough. Avodas Hashem takes a split second. Avodah Shabalev. And Tefillah doesn't have a share. And so often we have the opposite picture. Like if you daven Bechetzonius, if you daven without avodah Shabalev, you can do daven quickly. And we have this image, and it's so persistent in our minds, this image, and it's just false. Again, there might be some reasons for it being, and there might be and so on, but it just in the actual definition of things, in the simple basic reality, it's just false. We have this, and it's so hard to get rid of it. They say like a simple person davens quick, but a big tzaddik who has kavanah davens takes him longer. And there's no reason in the world that kavanah should take longer than it's actually just the opposite. Kavanah doesn't take time. I mean, it takes some time. We're not literally outside of time, but it doesn't take close to the amount of time that speech takes. I mean, if you want to say the whole Shemona Esrei and you want to say every word, it takes you a few minutes. There's no shortcuts. I mean, you could skip half of the syllables, but that's the only shortcut you can do. If you want to say all the syllables, it's going to take you a few minutes. And if you want to think the whole thing, you could think the whole thing without missing anything in like 30 seconds. So, and if someone would prioritize this, now, there were some people that actually did this. I mean, there's of course very known that Polish Chassidim used to say that it's better to daven quickly. And there's different traditional Chassidish certain people that would daven extremely quickly. And for some reason, this is not, most of the people that go around looking for avodah Shabalev don't buy this theory. And I'm not getting into practice. Different reasons for practice is looking different and so on. But I think we need to believe this reality. And yes, the kavanah takes a half a second, a split second, and that's how it's supposed to be. And that's because it's more valuable. Just like a piece of diamond is more valuable than a piece of coal, and it's much smaller because each part is much more valuable, much more potent. The thoughts are much more potent, and they're more potent. Of course, this potency gets expressed. You will see, and if you do it, and again, it's going to change you. But expecting for it to change you is what's lacking it. If you think Shavisi Aval Negdi Summit, it's so simple. And the Kabbalistic explanation of this, right? The Kavanah explanation of this, which Shavisi Avai and not understand or anything, take the Shem Yud Kevivka and visualize it. And you could associate it with, there's thousands of ways of visualizing it, having it. Just the most basic one, visualize it. Now, how long does it take? Like, I just did it 3 times within saying this sentence. And if you do that, or whenever you remind yourself, or whenever, you could do it like 10,000 times a day. Of course, that would change you. Or you could do it 5 times a year. And if you're consistent, just like anything else, consistency changes things very much. But it's just going to accumulate in some sense, and it's going to change you. And by doing things that are extremely easy, and the Rambam says that one of the hardships of Avodas Hashem is that people don't believe how easy it is. You need to believe that it's very easy. Kavanos are even easier than that. I'm saying Kavanos are easier. The people that are doing Kavanos are having an easier job than the people saying all the words. And of course, once you have the kavanah, it might be even easier to say the words too, because you associate the meaning with them and you associate the kavanah with them. That's the whole thing. So therefore, and just to finalize, get back to where we were, and therefore, just to explain that Arizal's way of thinking of it, therefore, having specific thoughts to think is important, at least for that Arizal's. I mean, of course, he has an entire system. I'm just trying to keep it simple for today. Because we often get this question and try to explain. We ask a question, what is Shara Kavanos? What are the Kavanos for? So of course, if I tell you what's Kavanah B'Tfilah for, you don't generally have this question. Because Al-Pshat, you say, well, for example, if Rosh Hashana is about Malchus or it's about Tshuva, so the Kavanah is to do Tshuva, and all the words are about doing Tshuva. And so to speak, the work of doing Kavanah, how do I have Rosh Hashana B'Kavanah? How do I do Tshuva B'Kavanah? Is you do introspection, you do meditation, you do learn something, whatever you do, in order to deepen your sense of doing tshuva, deepen your sense of trying to be closer to God, deepen your sense of trying to recognize that God's a thing, however you want to explain it. Now that is generally not something doesn't lend itself to a lot of particular words generally. In other words, there's no whole siddur to write down. Be mechavan this today and that tomorrow and that and this word and that word. It's all very general, very undifferentiated in some sense. Do tshuva, and it's all mostly located in your some sort of inner being or in your soul, whatever that's supposed to mean. And when people open Shara Kavanas, they see it not talking about things like this at all. It's not talking about how to be more sincere in your tshuva. It's not talking about deepening your sense of anything. It's just a bunch of words. People say, okay, either this is much higher than what I think, so maybe for some people this is their deepening sense of what everything is, and since I'm not that, so it's obviously not for me. That's one. And all these interpretations have long traditions. I'm just giving my opinion. Or this is much lower. This is, I don't know, some Mekabalim have some reason think that davening is doing math and gematrias of Shemes and stuff, and obviously what I'm doing is real work. It's real Avodas Hashem. It's changing my inner attitude to things and so on. Now, what both of these thoughts share is that they don't seem to take thought seriously, thought in the mundane sense. Either you think only being in some state of being, flying in some Eilam Atzilas, that's interesting, or only something very literal, something that you very deeply, extremely felt in your psyche, in your psychology is real. But just having a thought in the most basic sense, they don't take that seriously. And Arizal definitely does. And he definitely thinks that if you have a bad thought, you should fast 500 days just for having a thought. And obviously a bad thought doesn't mean an entire state of mind. It just means a thought. There's different kind of bad thoughts of chaos, thoughts of different things. That's just what it means. And the same thing when it's a good thought, he literally just means having a good thought. And since to him, the content of that thought is important, of course. There's not just a general undifferentiated, like I say, be mechavan Hashem avai, that's very undifferentiated. That is generally, and this is something that we could give a lot of classes about also, that Israel generally thinks that the more differentiated, the more particular you are, the more precise you're going to be, the more correct you're going to be. So you need to have the correct kavanah. Having the correct thought is what's going to give you the correct meichen, the correct shefa, the correct enlightenment, the correct part of the world that you need. Because of course, in general, things are very easy, but all real wisdom of the world is particular wisdom. All real wisdom is how to act in very specific situations or what very specific things mean. So he's going to tell you there's a different kavanah for Baruch, and a different kavanah for Atu, and a different for Hashem, and a different for Elikani, and a different for Melech, and so on. And each one of these, and a different one for Rosh Hashana, and a different one for the second day of Rosh Hashana, a different one for Sunday, Monday, for every day, and especially every Yom Tiv, and so on. For every mitzvah, there's a different kavanah, and that's a different thought. And you can't say, well, in my view, everything is just about having Yiras Shamayim, so there's only one thought. Yes, that's because you're not speaking in the world of thoughts. You're speaking in the world of feelings, or in the world of actions, or whatever it is. In the world of thoughts, it's very important which thought you have, and if I'm going to give you instructions to have certain thoughts in this word, certain thoughts in that word, and therefore if you write how he starts, I want to do Avodah Shebelev, and I'm skipping the second part of the sentence, right? In other words, I want to do it as it pertains to these days and the Yom Neroim, and there's Yeshiv al Kisedin, and all these things need to explain what they mean. They all mean extremely precise things, but I want to do this, and therefore what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on very nitty gritty words that say understood and try to get their meaning and try to get the kavanah of them. And that is how I will do Avodah Shebelev, Zutfilah B'Yom Neroim Eile.